8. Lieutenant Scheisskopf. Not even Clevenger understood how Milo could do that, and Clevenger knew everything. Clevenger knew everything about the war except why Yossarian had to die while Corporal Snark was allowed to live, or why Corporal Snark had to die while Yossarian was allowed to live. It was a vile and muddy war, and Yossarian could have lived without it. Lived forever, perhaps. Only a fraction of his countrymen would give up their lives to win it, and it was not his ambition to be among them. To die or not to die, that was the question, and Clevenger grew limp trying to answer it. History did not demand Yossarian's premature demise. Justice could be satisfied without it. Progress did not hinge upon it. Victory did not depend on it. That men would die was a matter of necessity. Which men would die, though, was a matter of circumstance. And Yossarian was willing to be the victim of anything but circumstance. But that was war. Just about all he could find in its favor was that it paid. It paid well and liberated children from the pernicious influence of their parents. Clevenger knew so much because Clevenger was a genius with a pounding heart and blanching face. He was a gangling, gawky, feverish, famish-eyed brain. As a Harvard undergraduate, he had won prizes in scholarship for just about everything, and the only reason he had not won prizes in scholarship for everything else was that he was too busy signing petitions, circulating petitions and challenging petitions, joining discussion groups and resigning from discussion groups, attending youth congresses, picketing other youth congresses, and organizing student committees in defense of dismissed faculty members. Everyone agreed that Clevenger was certain to go far in the academic world. In short, Clevenger was one of those people with lots of intelligence and no brains. And everyone knew it except those who soon found it out. In short, he was a dope. He often looked to Yossarian like one of those people hanging around modern museums with both eyes together on one side of a face. It was an illusion, of course, generated by Clevenger's predilection for staring fixedly at one side of a question and never seeing the other side at all. Politically, he was a humanitarian who did know right from left and was trapped uncomfortably between the two. He was constantly defending his communist friends to his right-wing enemies and his right-wing friends to his communist enemies, and he was thoroughly detested by both groups, who never defended him to anyone because they thought he was a dope. He was a very serious, very earnest, and very conscientious dope. It was impossible to go to a movie with him without getting involved afterward in a discussion on empathy, Aristotle, universals, messages, and the obligations of the cinema as an art form in a materialistic society. Girls he took to the theater had to wait until the first intermission to find out from him whether or not they were seeing a good or a bad play, and then found out at once. He was a militant idealist who crusaded against racial bigotry by growing faint in its presence. He knew everything about literature except how to enjoy it. Yossarian tried to help him. Don't be a dope, he had counseled Clevenger when they were both at cadet school in Santa Ana, California. I'm going to tell him, Clevenger insisted as the two of them sat high in the reviewing stands looking down on the auxiliary parade ground at Lieutenant Scheisskopf, raging back and forth like a beardless leer. Why me? Lieutenant Scheisskopf wailed. Keep still, idiot, Yossarian advised Clevenger avuncularly. You don't know what you're talking about, Clevenger objected. I know enough to keep still, idiot. Lieutenant Scheisskopf tore his hair and gnashed his teeth. His rubbery cheeks shook with gusts of anguish. His problem was a squadron of aviation cadets with low morale who marched atrociously in the parade competition that took place every Sunday afternoon. Their morale was low because they did not want to march in parades every Sunday afternoon and because Lieutenant Scheisskopf had appointed cadet officers from their ranks instead of permitting them to elect their own. I want someone to tell me, Lieutenant Scheisskopf beseeched them all prayerfully, if any of it is my fault. I want to be told. He wants someone to tell him, Clevenger said. He wants everyone to keep still, idiot, Yossarian answered. Didn't you hear him? Clevenger argued. I heard him, Yossarian replied. I heard him say very loudly and very distinctly that he wants every one of us to keep our mouths shut if we know what's good for us. I won't punish you, Lieutenant Scheisskopf swore. He says he won't punish me, said Clevenger. He'll castrate you, said Yossarian. I swear I won't punish you, said Lieutenant Scheisskopf. I'll be grateful to the man who tells me the truth. He'll hate you, said Yossarian. To his dying day, he'll hate you. Lieutenant Scheisskopf was an ROTC graduate who was rather glad that war had broken out, since it gave him an opportunity to wear an officer's uniform every day and say men in a clipped military voice to the bunches of kids who fell into his clutches every 8 weeks on their way to the butcher's block. He was an ambitious and humorless Lieutenant Scheisskopf who confronted his responsibilities soberly and smiled only when some rival officer at the Santa Ana Army Air Force Base came down with a lingering disease. He had poor eyesight and chronic sinus trouble, which made war especially exciting for him since he was in no danger of going overseas. The best thing about him was his wife, and the best thing about his wife was a girlfriend named Dory Duz, who did whenever she could and had a WAC uniform that Lieutenant Scheisskopf's wife put on every weekend and took off every weekend for every cadet in her husband's squadron who wanted to creep into her. Dory Duz was a lively little tart of copper, green, and gold who loved doing it best in tool sheds, phone booths, field houses, and bus kiosks. There was little she hadn't tried and less she wouldn't. She was shameless, slim, 19, and aggressive. She destroyed egos by the score and made men hate themselves in the morning for the way she found them, used them, and tossed them aside. Yossarian loved her. She was a marvelous piece of ass who found him only fair. He loved the feel of springy muscle beneath her skin everywhere he touched her the only time she'd let him. Yossarian loved Dory Duz so much that he couldn't help flinging himself down passionately on top of Lieutenant Scheisskopf's wife every week to revenge himself upon Lieutenant Scheisskopf for the way Lieutenant Scheisskopf was revenging himself upon Clevenger. Lieutenant Scheisskopf's wife was revenging herself upon Lieutenant Scheisskopf for some unforgivable crime of his she couldn't recall. She was a plump, pink, sluggish girl who read good books and kept urging Yossarian not to be so bourgeois with the R, without the R. Not to be so bourgeois without the R. She was never without a good book close by, not even when she was lying in bed, with nothing on her but Yossarian and Dory Duz's dog tags. She bored Yossarian, but he was in love with her, too. She was a crazy mathematics major from the Wharton School of Business who could not count to 28 each month without getting into trouble. Darling, we're going to have a baby again, she would say to Yossarian every month. You're out of your goddamn head, he would reply. I mean it, baby, she insisted. So do I. Darling, we're going to have a baby again, she would say to her husband. I haven't the time, Lieutenant Scheisskopf would grumble petulantly. Don't you know there's a parade going on? Lieutenant Scheisskopf cared very deeply about winning parades and about bringing Clevenger up on charges before the Action Board for conspiring to advocate the overthrow of the cadet officers Lieutenant Scheisskopf had appointed. Clevenger was a troublemaker and a wise guy. Lieutenant Scheisskopf knew that Clevenger might cause even more trouble if he wasn't watched. Yesterday it was the cadet officers, tomorrow it might be the world. Clevenger had a mind, and Lieutenant Scheisskopf had noticed that people with minds tended to get pretty smart at times. Such men were dangerous, and even the new cadet officers whom Clevenger had helped into office were eager to give damning testimony against him. The case against Clevenger was open and shut. The only thing missing was something to charge him with.